show you when you have 10, 5, and 0, okay?
Sounds good. Okay, thank you. Microphone? Oh, can you hear me? I can hear me. That's good. Let me do this and that. Okay, and do this. Hello. I'm happy to be here presenting in the afternoon at JSConf Colombia. My name is George Mandis, and I'm here to talk today about JavaScript, MIDI, and tiny computers. Thanks for coming back and bearing with me after the technical difficulties this morning. I feel like I kind of set things on a bad path, but hopefully I think they're straightened now. I think we got it figured out. There's been a lot of fun talks today about technical things and also sort of cultural things and fun things. A surprising amount of music has shown up in this conference today, which is pleasing to me. Normally my talk is the only one that touches on that in my experience. So it's been really fun to see that. So in that vein, my presentation is going to be kind of fun and talking about interesting, creative things that we can do with some of these technologies. First, a little bit, let's see. Okay. A little bit about me. You can find me at all these places if you want to email me or ping me or say something funny about me on Twitter while I'm talking up here. I'm a freelance web developer from Portland, Oregon. Somehow I'm not the only presenter from Portland, Oregon today. Emily will be speaking later today. It's kind of interesting. I've been developing for over 10 years, close to 11 years now. I think that's like 45 years in JavaScript years, I'm not sure. A lot of things have changed in that time. When you do it for over a decade, you have to wear a lot of different hats. I kind of do a 50-50% blend of front end and back end these days, just in case you're curious about any of that. So I think it's good to humanize developers at these conferences. I can get up here and just give a technical presentation about MIDI and JavaScript and what we're doing, but it might be easier when you go home later to remember something I've said. If you remember some random fun fact about me, maybe it helps. I find it helps me. So the other reason I like to present fun facts at the beginning is back in Portland, I teach a code camp sometimes. I do some mentoring. And one of the things I did with the newbies, with the new students, is I brought in developers to speak about their story, like their life experience and how they became developers. And what's really interesting is no two stories are the same. There's sort of a perception that it's just all computer science majors who did this and that and followed, from point A to point B. And when you start talking to people, you realize people come from all walks of life, And in that vein, I just wanted to share some random facts about me and humanize myself a little bit. This is my first time in Colombia. Gracias. If I knew applause was going to be that easy, I would have dropped that more in my slide. I once lived as a digital nomad in 18 different countries. It's kind of an interesting story. Ask me about it later if you're curious. I was born in Saudi Arabia. That's a random fact you might remember, and they'll help you remember the rest of this. That's a longer story. My most known projects are not very wonderful. They're not very, how do I say this? They're not very useful projects. I'm curious, a quick show of hands. Has anyone heard of Konami.js or Jekyll RSS feeds? I heard one, two, okay, not bad. Every once in a while I'm surprised and I get a few. If you're not familiar, which is most of you, Konami.js was a simple Easter egg code JavaScript thing that I wrote almost a decade ago, where you enter the Konami code on a website and then stupid things happen. Marvel.com used my script, Newsweek used it. It showed up on a couple of US government sites. It was really, for whatever reason, I made it at the right time and it got really popular and a lot of people use it and I still see it today. It's pretty funny to me. It's funny to me because that's like my most well-known thing if I start going through the list. I once unintentionally cheated while running a marathon in North Korea. I don't advocate cheating in general, but if you're going to cheat, just be very mindful of where you happen to be doing it, is all I can say. And normally that's my last fun fact, but after the introduction this morning, I felt like I had to add that I forgot that I described myself as a guitar banshee on the internet when she introduced me this morning, and that made me kind of laugh, so I had to throw that in there. Be careful what you say about yourself on the internet. Okay, but more relevantly, I like to break things. I like to stretch my tools to the extent that they're intended to be used and a little bit further just to see what we can make with them. So they're going to become a little more relevant later today when we talk about MIDI and what MIDI was designed for and how I'm trying to use MIDI to do interesting things. I think this process, I think it's just good for my brain. You know, it keeps me interested. It's like playing with our tools. It's a creative process, and I think through playing and exploration of our tools, at least for me, I think it makes me a better developer. I think it's good to have time to sort of play and do something creative and interesting, not just always learning the latest framework that came out this week or, you know, something that I necessarily have to apply to my work all the time. And I hope that this talk encourages you to maybe go home and do something kind of interesting and fun also. So now that we got everything up and working, let's break it again by doing an interactive experiment. So I have a little website here. And if any of you have a computer open, or perhaps even a phone, I think versions of Android with Chrome should work, feel free to pull up that website. And I want to try a little interactive demo that uses some of the stuff I'm going to talk about. And I'm not going to tell you what it's going to do. We're just going to see what happens here. So I'm going to wait a moment. And hopefully it works. OK, looks like I'm seeing numbers go up. We got one person in the orchestra. I'll wait until we get a few more. It's a little more interesting when we have more than one. 2. OK. If I can get about 4, that's usually like the sweet spot. Though once I opened it up and there's 157 at one conference, and that might have been too many. See if I can get one more person in there. OK, 3. So for those of you who have connected, make sure your volume is up as loud as it can go, I hope. And let's just see if this works, or if I break the connection again. And because it's kind of a big room, if you hear something on your machine, please raise your hand so I can try this. Let's see. Is there one back there? No? No? Oh, wait. Thought I heard something. No? Oh, did it fail? Well, all right. Well, what was supposed to happen, I won't push my luck on this one. What was supposed to happen is as I played the notes up here on the keyboard, I'm sending MIDI signals to my computer, which is then sending the information about those notes to to the people who were connected over a Peer.js connection, over WebRTC. And we were going to, in an ideal situation, we get different sounds coming out in the audience as I play up here on the piano, and it's kind of fun. Things are a little iffy connection-wise today, so it sounds like it might have crashed. I'll just move on, and if you're really curious, maybe we can demo out in the hall if you want to track me down. Okay, so I'll skip over that demo here. So what I'm talking about today, I'm talking about JavaScript, un poco obvio. This is a JavaScript conference. We're talking about tiny computers, and what I mean by tiny computers are single board controllers and single board microcontrollers, things like Arduinos, Esperinos, Raspberry Pis, and more. Raise your hand real quick if you've dabbled with these or heard of any of these guys, okay? So I just want to see like how much hardware. We got maybe third of the people are hardware dabblers. Okay, that's good. And then lastly, the thing we're talking about is MIDI. So a quick show of hands. Who thinks they know what MIDI is or have dabbled with MIDI before? Okay, okay. Also not a huge number of people. That's good, so I get to explain to you what it is. So I'm going to dive into all 3 of those in a moment and describe them. But first I want to talk about what makes all these things in combination kind of exciting to me. These things in combination are a really wonderful platform for making interactive hardware things with JavaScript. You can make it as easy or as complicated as you want it to be, as I'll show you. It's a really low barrier to entry towards starting to dabble with basic hardware programming and the Internet of Things, however you want to look at that. It's a really great way to dip your toes in that water and start to make really creative, fun, and kind of interesting outside-the-box things. MIDI is a very simple protocol for this, as I'll show you. And, oh yeah, I have these points as I was saying that. And yeah, so that's what makes this kind of an exciting platform for me. You can make a lot of fun, creative, interactive things using a very simple stack of affordable and easily available, easy to work with things. Okay, so why JavaScript? JavaScript is everywhere. I don't need to tell you that. There's conferences and all kinds of, there's thousands of conferences, it seems like, but it's everywhere. Like 10 years ago when I started, JavaScript it was on the front end only. It was in your browser. And now it's on the server, and now we're building chatbots, and we're building, hardware-based things, and we have apps, and we have AI, and we have, you name it, it's being done, or at least attempted to be done in JavaScript for better or worse. So that's, the primary reason I chose JavaScript, to try to do some of the things I'm talking about here. What's interesting is that Stanford University, that when their introduction to a computer science course, they used to use Java, and over this past year, they switched to JavaScript. So JavaScript really is becoming like a lot of people's first introduction to programming, for better or worse, in some ways. So it's a good place to be. It's where the people are. I kind of just said that, but not only is it everywhere as far as the tech stack is concerned, it's where a lot of people are doing the work. One of the things I've also learned in 10 years of freelancing, is that things can change quickly, and you kind of have to go to where all the attention is being paid. And right now that's JavaScript and that's Node, and so long as it's there, that's a good place to be. You're not going to run out of work. You're not going to run out of new things to learn for a while, I think, if you focus on JavaScript. JavaScript's asynchronous nature is a very natural fit with the way MIDI wants to do things. MIDI doesn't care when things happen, if they happen at all. It just sits there and waits patiently to listen for events and then sometimes spit events back out. It's a totally asynchronous protocol invented in 1983 before JavaScript was even born. And so when we write things that interact with MIDI in JavaScript, it's a very natural fit. You're already writing in a style that plays nicely with the way MIDI wants to do things. Okay, so why tiny computers? First of all, what is a tiny computer? Or what am I talking about? Like I said, I'm talking about single board computers and single board microcontrollers, like some of those brands I mentioned earlier. I'm talking about things like these. We're talking about Raspberry Pis, Arduinos, chip computers, Esperinos. Esperinos are kind of fun, actually. This little clicker I have in my hand is actually an Esperino. I programmed it to be a Bluetooth MIDI instrument that talks to a web page that is my presentation, and it uses that to sort of control my slideshow as I go. So I can click, I can go forward, I can go back. If I'm feeling kind of nervous, I can give myself applause. Okay, good. I can. All of these are great. They're fun because they're, affordable and generally pretty easy to use. They're powerful enough to do a lot of fun, creative things. They don't compare to like the computer I'm presenting on, obviously, up here, but they're still like 10 times faster than the computer I grew up learning on. It's really kind of fascinating what you can do. They're great for standalone projects and art projects. I'll talk about it a little bit later, but they are, if you want to make like a kiosk-style interactive exhibit that you might put in a museum or something like that, tiny computers and this tech stack is really a great platform for that kind of thing. Most of them are capable of running JavaScript natively in some capacity or another. The Esperino, actually, you write on the hardware level in JavaScript. It's kind of interesting. Others, are just like tiny Linux computers. You can run Node and do other interactive things there. There's a great library called Johnny5.io. Who's familiar with that? I'm curious. Anybody? Yeah. So Johnny5.io is a really great website to go to sort of see how to get Node up and running on a variety of hardware. Don't worry about remembering that. I have a website at the end that has links to most of the stuff I'm talking about, so don't worry about that. I talk kind of fast sometimes. They're also fun. And so why MIDI? And what is MIDI exactly? So MIDI is an acronym. It stands for the Musical Instrument Device Interface. Okay, that maybe tells me something, maybe it doesn't. I find for those that do know MIDI, or for those that are familiar with MIDI to some extent, there is a little bit of confusion sometimes as to what that actually means, because it's used interchangeably for three different things, sort of. It's used to talk about the MIDI protocol, which is how the machines talk to each other, like how a musical instrument talks to another musical instrument, or how a musical instrument might talk to a computer. It's also used to describe the MIDI standard, which is sort of this in-between thing where I'll explain the next slide, actually. And third of all, MIDI is often used to talk about MIDI files, which I find is what most people are familiar with when we're talking about MIDI. You know, the sort of like chintzy music, the sounds kind of like this, you know, or something like this. You know, that is a MIDI file, and there's MIDI. To say that this is MIDI doesn't really capture the whole thing. That's my point here. So MIDI, the protocol, that's kind of the thing that we're focusing on today. That's the thing that makes it interesting. So it's a way for electronic musical instruments to speak to hardware and other MIDI-capable devices like my laptop or like some of these devices I have up here on the table. It's kind of like some of the IoT hardware protocols before any of that existed in a weird way. Yeah, it's a super simple protocol. It just basically you send 3 numbers back and forth, and you get to decide what those 3 numbers mean to some extent. Now, the MIDI standard is actually the thing that gives those numbers meaning, right? So if I push this button here on my keyboard, that's going to send 3 numbers to my computer, and because of the MIDI standard, which was decided upon by electronic music instrument manufacturers, they all have agreed that that particular combination of numbers that gets sent when I hit that button, that's going to be a note. That's going to be a C, a middle C, and this other number is going to tell it, okay, this person is pressing the button and it's on, and when I lift my finger, that sends another set of 3 numbers, telling my computer, hey, they've lifted their finger up now, that number is off. And there's kind of variations on that. I like to say, think about HTTP codes, right? Everyone's familiar with that, I imagine, or most people. So you've all gotten a 404 error on a web page, right? So an HTTP code is just a number. And the reason those numbers have meaning is because standards bodies have decided to give those things meaning, and we all agree on that. MIDI is kind of the same way. The MIDI signals, the messages themselves, are just a series of numbers, and what they actually correspond to on the instruments is just sort of agreed upon by a standard. And where this gets fun is that we can ignore the standard if we want to start making things that have nothing to do with music. We just need to know what numbers are getting spit out back and forth. And lastly, a MIDI file just contains a sequence of MIDI events. It describes when they happen, and that's how you can basically recreate a song using a MIDI file. It makes me kind of think of a player piano or this kind of a visualization, sort of a Guitar Hero kind of a thing. So to get back to the question, why MIDI? MIDI is asynchronous and plays nicely with JavaScript. It talks to hardware, which is sort of where my interest lies and is a fun way to dabble in the IoT. And MIDI is really easy to use for non-musical applications because it's a simple protocol. It's just 3 numbers. And here's the other really cool thing. Chrome talks to MIDI. All of you out there have Chrome on your computer right now. I could plug in any of these devices, and we could write a little web page in JavaScript that starts talking to that device and start making something interactive right now. You don't need to install anything special. We don't need special drivers. You don't need anything. Chrome does it natively. And by extension, so does Chromium and Electron and Chrome OS. And that kind of opens up the door for possibilities. You can make a standalone MIDI-capable application using Electron, and if you're using custom MIDI hardware, suddenly you have a very custom hardware interaction experience that you're creating just using JavaScript, and that's kind of fun to me. And you can also do it on the server side with Node, which I realize I sort of skipped over. For those who are curious, caniuse.com lets us know that we have 59% global coverage on the Web MIDI API, which is pretty useless, but I just want to throw that up there. And when I talk about MIDI controllers, like musical instruments, I wanted to show some of you what these are, since not all of you are probably musicians, and it might be helpful just to see this. So we're talking about things like keyboards, like this. That's actually the first MIDI-capable synthesizer ever created back in 1983. Little things like that, DJ equipment, buttons, more buttons, foot controllers. This one you can actually breathe into like a flute. This one is like an accelerometer that I'm actually wearing on my finger, but I may not get to because I'm going to kind of rush through some demos here in a moment. Or you can build your own, which is also where it gets interesting. So when I said it can be as easy or as complicated as you want it to be, this is kind of what I'm talking about. That is a small computer I purchased from Adafruit.com. It's the Circuit Playground. And I was playing around in a hotel at a different conference, trying to build a little banana piano. And it was really easy. So I turned it into a MIDI controller, and when I tap the little bananas, it sends MIDI signals. And then 2 minutes later, I make a little JavaScript page that listens for those MIDI signals. And now you can make, it doesn't have to be music. I can make a website that just says, hey, you're touching a banana. Great. I told you this wasn't going to be a useful talk necessarily, right? I might breeze through this because I'd like to show you some demos, but a MIDI message is just 3 numbers. If you want to know more about that, go to the website I'm going to show you at the end. So yeah, this page. So that when I read the signal from the hardware, I get it like this. When I want to interpret it per the MIDI standard, I have to look at it through this lens. But at the end of the day, all I have to know is that when I hit this button on my keyboard, I get an array of 3 numbers like that. That's really all I need to know. And we'll try it on a different page here. So what does using JavaScript and MIDI look like? It's the same as using like the web camera or the location API or the notification API. You ask for permission, it returns a promise. If the user allows permission for that, then you can start interacting with any MIDI device that's plugged into that page. Plugged into that computer while they're on that page. It's really very straightforward. And there are some existing libraries out there that make it easier to work with in certain capacities, particularly if you're making musical things. But like I said, I want to show you some of the non-musical demos that we can do here. And when we're doing MIDI on the server, it's pretty much the same. There are a couple extra things. We can do interesting system level things. Latency can actually be more of an issue on the sort of server side, depending on what you're trying to make. And working with MIDI files is easier, as you might imagine, but for the most part, it's pretty much the same. Here's an example of a node script that interacts with MIDI, listens for a MIDI message. That's all there is to it as far as just talking to MIDI and getting it to work. So let me show you a couple things that use the stack. And like I said, if you're interested, you can track me down in the hallway. I'm happy to show you more of this and talk a little bit more about how you can get started with this at home. So I will show you. I have a lot of demos here. Let me find a good one. Okay. So this is one of the first demos I ever made. I'm a musician sort of back at home. I'm actually a very analog musician. And I played somewhere once with my friend, and we wanted to have a visualization behind us. We wanted a sort of artsy visualization. They had like poems and words and moving video and stuff. And I'd been just learning a little bit about MIDI and how to script it, and I realized I could write a little program that just generates random art behind us while we play. And so I made this little thing that generates random poems when I hit this button down here, which I normally have by my foot. And then I hit this other button, and it creates sort of random art. So these are the kind of things I like to make in my spare time, just random generative art that is controlled by MIDI controllers and things like that. What's funny is every once in a while it like sort of almost seems like it might have meaning. Okay. Oops. No, not again. There we go. Here's another quick demo. This is a launch pad, which is a common DJ instrument. You can see this up here on my screen. And I just created a simple page that allows me to draw images and sort of interact with it on the page. It's kind of fun. Not bad. I made another, well, I won't do that one, I apologize. Do this one. This is another one that uses the Launchpad. One of my first programs I ever wrote was something that just bounces a ball on the screen when I was like 10 years old. That's become like my version of Hello World when I want to learn a new language or platform or something like that. And so I made something that just sort of does that on the screen. And if I add a couple more, they start to interact with each other when they collide. Like I said, it's like creative exploration, creating art, creative interactive hardware, real world things using JavaScript. This is just an ordinary web page. There's really nothing else special going on there. I will skip that one also here. This one, sort of an interactive maze. I can control where this little guy shows up using the keyboards, or using the arrow keys on my keyboard. I actually have this set up to use WebSockets and stuff too, but I'm not going to do that now. And where the physical interactive component comes in is I can like start to draw walls on the screen. And I can't actually pass the wall until I make the little hole there. Anyway, fun, goofy, interactive things. Obviously, at a bigger screen, that'd be kind of more interesting. I'll show you the very last one, which is who's familiar with the game Go? Any Go players here? Okay, so what I have here is a fully functional, though slightly small version of Go that we can play either by taking turns on the board like this. Let's see. I'm not very good at Go, I apologize. See? Or I can actually click over here on the screen, interact with it that way. And what's fun is I have a server-side version of this running on a tiny computer that's entirely self-contained. And I powered it with a battery once, and I had the world's most inconvenient tiny Go board running on a tiny computer. That's the last demo I'm going to show up here because I'm kind of running out of time. There are many more demos I have that I could show you. Again, track me down if you'd like to see them or talk about any of them. Some of them are less visual. The last thing I'm going to leave you with is this is an installation in Seattle, Washington, near where I'm from in Portland. And they've used billiard balls and pipes and interesting things to create an interactive musical sculpture. And I'd like to end with this because I think it's cool how they've taken totally non-musical things to create this big interactive musical thing. And that's in some ways kind of the inspiration for taking this musical protocol and trying to make interactive non-musical things. Gracias, and thank you for your time.